Have you ever stopped to think why, even with all the modern medicine, we still turn to saints for protection? It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But this is a reality that defies logic. Faith and science walking hand in hand, with stories that span centuries and surprise us to this day. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. The incredible journey of St. Blaise, a doctor who became the greatest protector of throat diseases. You'll discover miracles that defy simple explanations, a man who abandoned fame to embrace a much greater mission, and how this story can impact your life today, whether you're a believer or just curious. Get ready, because what comes next will shake your beliefs and perhaps transform your perspective on healing. You know, when we seem to have everything, but still feel a hollowness that gnaws at us? That's exactly how St. Blaise lived. A respected physician, with a keen intellect, healing hands, and a name already well known, but still his chest felt heavy. He saw people sacrificing themselves for a faith he didn't yet fully understand, and it moved him. While many fled from pain, he faced it head-on, trying to understand what lay behind that supernatural courage. And that was a turning point. He understood that what he sought wasn't found in formulas or surgical instruments, but in the essence of a living faith. Restlessness didn't demand silence. It demanded transformation. And St. Blaise, instead of seeking answers in the city's corridors, decided to go where few would dare, the desert. Imagine leaving everything, absolutely everything, to live in a cave, eating only what God sent? Sounds crazy, right? But that was his strategy. There, where the world no longer screamed, he began to hear something greater. Have you ever tried to completely disconnect to listen to your own soul? Even if it's just for 30 minutes a day? Try walking without your cell phone, sitting in silence, observing the sky. The desert today might be a park in your city, but the effect can be the same, revealing. By doing this, St. Blaise began to realize that true healing doesn't come from medicine alone. It comes from listening. He understood that suffering was a bridge, not a punishment. It was God calling. And in that desert, which for many was the end of the line, he found a new beginning, a purpose. And from that moment on, what was once just a talent became a mission. But this new mission began to attract something unexpected: crowds. News travels fast in the wind when it's carried by hope. And that's exactly what began to happen. In the middle of nowhere, in that unlikely cave, people began to appear. Some came with ailing bodies, others with broken souls, but all carried a certainty in their eyes. If this man gave up everything for God, he knows something we don't yet. And it was there, amidst prayers and profound silences, that the first miracles began to happen. A boy, on the verge of death from a thorn stuck in his throat, was healed with a simple prayer and an act of faith. It wasn't just a physical healing. It was a cry from heaven saying, "I am here." And what to do in the face of something like this? Amazement, tears, and faith. It was this faith that made St. Blaise's fame soar. He was no longer just a doctor who cared for bodies. Now he was an intercessor who touched where no one else could reach. And it didn't stop there. A widow, desperate because her pig, the source of her household's livelihood, had been stolen by a wolf, asked for help. And what happened? The wolf simply returned the animal. This may seem like a fairy tale, but for those who live by faith, it's just another chapter in God's extraordinary work. And between you and me, how many times do we lose something and think it's the end? Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just the intermission of a miracle. These stories show that when faith enters, logic takes leave. But be careful. A miracle isn't a spectacle, it's an answer. And every answer begins with sincere request. St. Blaise didn't exalt himself with his deeds. He simply prayed and let God act. This teaches us something powerful. Our role is to trust, even when everything seems too strange. Because sometimes, the only thing that prevents a miracle is our rush to understand everything ahead of time. And guess what starts to happen when such faith begins to take shape? The entire people begin to look to him as a leader. Some people try to hide, but the light they carry simply won't let them. St. Blaise just wanted to follow his path of prayer, peace, and silence. But the people could no longer accept life without that man around. When the city's bishop passed away, there was no doubt. Everyone cried out for St. Blaise. He resisted, tried to stay away, even argued that he wasn't worthy. But the truth is, when vocation knocks, refusal becomes a delay in achieving purpose. And he understood this. He took on the mission as bishop, not because he wanted a title or status, but because he knew he was now the voice of hope for a cornered people. But look, accepting leadership in a time of peace is one thing. Taking responsibility in the midst of cruel persecution is another story. The Roman Empire was divided between two emperors, and one of them, Licinius, wanted to erase Christianity with violence. As if you were erasing faith with a sword, right? The mayor of Sebaste, Agricola, was a puppet of this system, and he began imprisoning Christians without distinction. Meanwhile, St. Blaise did not hide behind the walls of the episcopal palace. On the contrary, he wrote letters, secretly visited those in need, and strengthened the hearts of the faithful who tremble with fear. This is not just courage. It is love in the form of action. Many people today think that leadership is about giving orders, appearing in public, and speaking beautifully. But St. Blaise shows us that the true leader is the one who kneels first, who cries alongside others, who commits to the suffering of others. Even knowing he could be captured at any moment, he remained steadfast. This makes us think, what have we done with the opportunities to lead that arise in our lives? It could be in a small group, in our family, or even at work. Are we influencing with faith? St. Blaise was already beginning to prepare, even without knowing it, for the most decisive moment of his mission. The day arrived that every Christian at the time feared, but which St. Blaise seemed to await with serenity. The soldiers stormed the cave, and instead of finding a desperate man, they found someone in deep prayer. He stood up, looked into the eyes of those armed men, and welcomed them with joy. That's right, with joy. The night before, he had already received a divine visitation that revealed what was to come. And now he walked not as a prisoner, but as a messenger who knew that, even in chains, his mission would not end there. With each step he took, more people followed him in tears, as if they knew there was a martyr there. Before Mayor Agricola, he received the order that many had already given in to: deny Christ and worship the Roman gods. St. Blaise's response was not arrogant, but firm. He stated, with the calm of one who had already spoken to heaven, I will not worship false gods, only the true one. From that moment on, the terror began. He was cruelly flogged, and even with his flesh torn, he did not utter a single word to spare. It is easy to speak of faith when everything is going well, but true faith is proven in pain, in discomfort, in the hour when the body wants to give up and the soul still cries out for fidelity. St. Blaise teaches us this without words, only with his posture. In prison, he didn't complain. He prayed. He transformed his cell into an altar and his pain into a sacrifice. And this is where a powerful lesson comes in. How often do we turn our problems into excuses? St. Blaise transformed his wounds into bridges. When taken back to the mayor after a night of suffering, he asks, Do you really think torture can tear away my love for God? This phrase is a slap in the face of cowardice. In response, he is hanged and torn apart with iron teeth. But he remains standing. This is not just resistance. It is faith incarnate. And meanwhile, something extraordinary began to stir in the hearts of the people. In the midst of that brutal scene, 7 women appear with a gesture that seems simple, but which reveals a grandeur faith. They approach St. Blaise, kneel, and begin to collect the blood dripping from the saint's wounds. Think about that for a second. In the midst of persecution, knowing they could die, they chose to honor that man's pain with compassion. This isn't just courage, it's conviction. The mayor, of course, is enraged. But instead of fear, what he sees in those women is wisdom, and a cunning that only intelligent faith knows how to use. They say they will only worship the Roman gods if they can first wash them in the lake. The proposal was absurd to anyone with any sense. But Agricola's pride got the better of him. He agrees. And what happens? The women throw all the idols into the lake. Before a perplexed crowd, they show that statues have no power. And they even challenge the mayor. If they were real gods, they would have foreseen what was about to happen. It's the kind of attitude we never forget, because it shows that faith isn't just about kneeling and praying. It's also about thinking, reacting, and taking an intelligent stance. Often, the greatest miracle we can bring about is when we choose the right boldness at the right time. The punishment came. They were hanged, torn with the same instruments used against St. Blaise, thrown into the fire, but none of it consumed them, because when the soul burns with faith, the fire of the world doesn't burn. When they were beheaded, their last words weren't screams, but prayers. They surrendered their souls to God with the sweetness of those going home. This carries weight. It has an impact, and it leads us to reflect. Have we loved God enough to, if necessary, lose everything for Him? These women knew that life doesn't end here, and as their bodies fell, the heavens opened to receive their souls. But the story still had a surprising chapter ahead. After everything that happened, the mayor decided to close the chapter once and for all. He ordered St. Blaise to be thrown into a deep lake, hoping the water would silence what not even torture could silence. But then the unexpected happened. When St. Blaise made the sign of the cross, the water simply solidified beneath his feet. He stood as if walking on solid ground. And then, with heavenly boldness, he challenged the mayor. If your gods are true, send your men here. The scene seems straight out of a movie, but it is faith at its most daring and supernatural. Agricola, blinded by fury and pride, orders the soldiers into the lake. They enter confidently, but soon the water returns to normal and they all drown. St. Blaise, on the other hand, walks back, serene, with the calm of someone who already knew the end of the story. Upon reaching the mayor, he firmly declares, "I am a slave of Christ, and I do not worship demons." This sentence echoes like a hammer on a stone. And there, before the crowd and an enraged governor, St. Blaise is condemned to beheading. His body falls, but the impact of his faith rises stronger than ever. Many who were there converted, because it's impossible to see such dedication and continue living as before. And here's a reflection we often avoid. How many times do we deny our faith to maintain a reputation, please someone, or avoid conflict? St. Blaise preferred to lose his head than to lose his fidelity. And when life is driven by this kind of conviction, not even death is defeat. It becomes a seed. And like every seed, it would still blossom in countless hearts. But what perhaps no one expected was what would come next in the following centuries. Now that you know the story and miracles of St. Blaise, here's a question to reflect on. How have you been caring for your own faith in the face of life's challenges? Are we willing to maintain serenity and courage, even when everything seems to be conspiring against us? This saint example shows us that true strength comes from deep faith, from hope that doesn't waver, even when reality is harsh. So, how about starting to apply this courage today, whether facing a fear, a problem, or even strengthening your spirituality with small daily actions? And speaking of which, tell me in the comments, which part of St. Blaise's story touched you most? Do you believe miracles still happen today? I'd love to hear your opinion. If you want to continue learning about faith, miracles, and inspiring stories, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss anything, and share this video with anyone who needs a word of hope today. Let's join us on this journey of growth and transformation.